here. It's been over 2 years since our last boards and commissions training. I appreciate wholeheartedly being back to seeing each other and engaging in person. A big thank you to Faye, who worked hard to update our boards and commissions manual. And I'll make this short so Faye can jump in and get started because we have another meeting after this that we will have to run to. So Muhammad Gandhi said, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. Serving on city boards and commissions takes time and dedication, and I want to thank you, and I want you to know that myself and the other city councilors are so thankful that you volunteer to serve. We value your input, suggestions, and guidance as experts in your fields and what you bring to your positions and with our recommendations to council. Our boards and commissions are integral to the success of our city. It is your behind-the-scenes work, research, and discussions that we are thankful for. In the recent days, we've had some controversial boards and commissions things going on, and I want to assure you that your city councilors are so grateful for your hard work. And I know sometimes serving on a board, you're passionate about your board and your one thing, and sometimes when you bring things to city council and we want to change them or work on it or we challenge you, it's because we have so many other things on our plate, and it has nothing to do with your work and dedication to your position. And so if at any point you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to Faye, your board chair, or your council liaison for help and support. And thank you once again for all you do. I'm going to turn it over to Faye.
So welcome everyone. Please, the centerpieces that you see on your tables with the flowers are City of Durango water bottles. Please take them home so that we don't have to clean them up. That's the way that's supposed to work. Again, same thing with the bags that are out there as well. The boxes that are next to the centerpieces have the lids and the straws and the other pieces in there for you. So please take those with you when you go, just to help us out and we don't have to clean up, quite honestly. So if I could just take a second and have everybody we'll start here and just if you could just say what your name is and what board you're on so that we know kind of like what's the rest of our staff knows what board you're on. That would be great.
Shout it out?
Yeah, just shout it out.
My name is Kate Wagner. I'm on the Multimodal Advisory Board.
Yeah, Paul Black, Historical Preservation Board.
Jean Foster, Library Advisory Board. I'm Martha Jason. I'm with the Multimodal Advisory Board.
Seth Burton, Parks and Rec Advisory Board.
Bill LeBaire, Library Advisory Board.
Andrew Allport, Public Land.
Suzanne's one of our staff members.
I assist with the appointments.
Hey, Matt Thacker, Natural Lands Preservation Advisory.
Brian Cox, also Natural Lands Board.
And
Management, Budget and Strategic Plan Officer for the City of Durango.
I'm Heather Walker. I'm Administrative Analyst for the Public Works Department and Secretary for the Infrastructure Advisory Board.
I'm John Malone, Chair of the Infrastructure Advisory Board.
Roger Zolaris on the Airport Commission and the Strategy Long-Term Plans.
Dave Peters, I'm on SALTBAT and the Infrastructure Advisory Board.
Kim Skinner, staff of the city, and serve as market support of the South Town.
I'm Vicki Vandergrift. I'm the staff for the Historic Preservation Board.
I'm Terry Nitram, Parks and Recreation Director.
And welcome. You're one of our new members, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Sorry, I got stuck on the wrong cat.
Oh, perfect. Not a problem. I don't recall your name, sir.
I'm Brad.
And you're on
Arts Commission.
the Creative Economy? Great. Creative Economy Commission. So I'm Faye Harmer. I'm your city clerk. I'm just going to say a couple of things. First of all, the way boards and commissions are set up with the city is that city council, as you know, creates all the policies and procedures for the boards. And as you all well know, they make all the appointments for all the people on the boards. The city clerk's office is responsible for the administrative side of the overall boards and commissions functions. So your staff liaison functions as the administrative person for your particular board, but our department sets up the interviews, keeps track of board rosters, maintains the policies and procedures manuals, those kinds of administrative tasks that affect all the boards. Okay, so that's kind of the rules of where everybody plays. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben Florine. He's our deputy clerk, and he'll continue on with our part of the presentation.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm tied in with boards and commissions because I'm actually the staff liaison for the Mayor's Youth Advisory Commission. So I help out with a lot of their functions and serve as a point with the city as well. So we are going to talk about the general overview of the city and the governing body that makes it up. So real quick, if you know which two pieces make up Durango's governance, go ahead and raise your, I'm just kidding. So we do that for the third graders when they come in and do mock council meetings with them. So it's really funny watching them like squirm in their seat and like, city manager, oh, that's one piece. But anyways, so I'm a good person to talk about this. But the city of Durango is a home rule city. The charter was adopted in 1912. It's a council manager form of government. So our city council is the policymaking body with legislative authority. They select our city manager, our city attorney, and the municipal court judges. And then the other piece, like I said, is our city manager, who's responsible for implementing council's policy and overseeing the day-to-day operations and staff who will carry out council's policies. So that's our two-piece City of Durango government. And I'm actually going to bump it over to our city attorney, Dirk Nelson, and we'll start with the main portion of our overview of the city boards and commissions.
Let me jump in there for just a second.
Oh, sure.
We got a couple other slides in here. Oh,
Sorry.
not a problem. We just wanted to briefly let you know that the city of Durango has 23 boards and commissions total. So we are on our side, the administrative side of that, that's pretty wild some days, especially when you get through the appointment process, and a total of about 125 volunteers. We have regulatory boards, quasi-judicial boards, advisory boards, and then we have other, I guess, because we didn't know what else to call them. These slides give you kind of a general idea of which ones are the quasi-judicial boards. Those are ones that are making just, more policy-related decisions. Advisory boards that are giving advice to council on various specific topics. And then these are our other boards and commissions, various commissions that are required by other things, by special districts, all kinds of different stuff. Basic membership, we have regular voting members. Some seats have very specific requirements, like multimodal has very specific requirements, like Martha will know about. Some are for cycling, some are for disabled, some are for representing different areas of the community. And council always gives a preference for residents of the city of Durango. Associate members are subject matter experts that can come in and help your boards on various topics. And then we have alternates who are generally non-voting, but will fill in when there's lack of a quorum or when there's a member that's absent on the board. We have different board liaisons. We have council liaisons who sit in on the board and represent the interests of council to the board and report back to council on the board's thoughts and ideas. And then we have staff administrators, as Ben mentioned, with MIAC, who provide the minutes, who provide support to the board, general information that they need getting back to the city. In general, most boards serve 3-year terms, with the exception of MIAC, because they run on the school year. And I think with the exception of the Business Improvement District, there are no limits on current terms. Officers, the chair will help develop the agendas and runs the meeting. And of course, some boards also have vice chairs. And all meetings are conducted with Robert's Rules of Order in mind, and Dirk will go over that a little bit more in his presentation. Basic Zoom etiquette. Obviously, we're doing a lot of electronic meetings. Just things to be aware of as you are on a Zoom meeting. These are public meetings. The public can watch these meetings or go back and watch the recordings of these meetings. So please be sure to be on time. Pay attention to your mute so your dog's not barking in the background, preferably. Learn the controls within the programs so you know how to share your screen if you're asked to, or mute or unmute, do whatever you need to do there. Please use video whenever you can, just because the meetings are more interactive when they can see the other person. Avoid multitasking. If you're doing 3 other things, you're not paying attention to the meeting. So if you can avoid multitasking, that would be great. Dress appropriately. That's always the one we'll throw in there. Always check your background for distractions. If there's, inappropriate things in your background or just things that are really distracting, a mirror that flashes every time a car drives by, that's going to distract everybody in the meeting, things like that. So just kind of be aware of what your background looks like when you turn your video on. Please don't wear advertising or slogans on your t-shirts. You are representing the city in these meetings, and it may or may not be the position of the city that's on your shirt. So please make sure you don't do that. Eating, of course, if you're going to have a snack, you might want to turn your camera off for a few minutes and try to make eye contact with the people that are on your screen. If you're looking away, looking at another screen, it's, again, distracting to the rest of the people. Boards and Commissions manuals. We are not providing hard copies of the Boards and Commission manual this year in accordance with our strategic goal of environmental sustainability. We are providing them in electronic format and asking you to make notations as you need from there. So if you have not gotten your PDF of your new Boards and Commissions manual, please contact your staff liaison. They should have already provided that to you, but they will have a copy of that for you, or you can contact me directly and I'll be happy to send one out to you. 2 changes that I will note in the Boards and Commissions manual this year. Associate members have been redefined as a member. A board or commission will only attend the board meetings as requested by the board on a specific subject. And associate members are to be appointed by council at the recommendation of the board and reviewed every 3 years. That will affect a few of our boards. And the number of continuous terms with the election, at the exception of the election commission, which is statutorily different, members may serve as chairman for only 1 year. This was a council decision in the new manual. So if your chairman has been a chairman for a year, you need to be looking at doing an election and electing a new chairman. Any questions for this section? Now we really will turn it over to Dirk.
Thanks, Faye. Whoa, I broke it again. Yes, I'm Dirk Nelson. I'm the city attorney for the city of Durango. Good to see our boards and commission members in person. We haven't done this in a while. So appreciate you taking time out of everyone's busy day to sit in on this process. I'm going to sort of move through what may sound like do's and don'ts, but I think it's helpful as I move through this. If any of you have questions, I think it helps to chime in. In the past, I've learned that sometimes the questions actually provide the best opportunity to let everyone kind of understand, what's going on. And if you don't understand or have questions about something, please go ahead and ask. So we're starting with the Code of Ethics, Code of Conduct. The city adopted, oops, wrong way. The city adopted a Code of Conduct and Code of Ethics in 2014. That it was amended in 2017, but it sets out mandatory standards of ethical conduct. It sets out constitutes acceptable behavior for elected and appointed officials. Provides enforceable guidelines that further public trust in the public process. Provides a process where city officials may identify and resolve conduct and ethics issues, as well as a complaint process from anyone who desires to file a complaint. A couple of the, set up also to include even the avoiding appearances of impropriety. It established a board of ethics, again, that receives and hears and acts on ethics complaints. Oops, I'm going the wrong way again. This is important, a question about who's covered by the code of ethics. Officers, boards and commission members, candidates in certain circumstances, and former officers for some time periods can be covered by the code. So the long and the short of that is that all of you as boards and commission members are covered by the Code of Ethics, and you will be expected to sign the document that you agree to abide by the terms of the Code of Ethics. So while I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail here, the Code of Ethics is available online. It's part of the city code. You can take a look at it, and I encourage you to do so if you have specific questions about anything in the code of conduct or code of ethics. The code of conduct is set up more to be about more conduct of behavioral issues and meetings and the like. Code of ethics is more directed specifically at the kinds of things that would be a violation of public trust. So, so here's some of the information in the code of ethics that are the more mandatory part of the code. So things that are prohibited or that are discussed in some detail about being problematic under the code. So one of those going down the list is disclose confidential information. If you're given confidential information, and sometimes you will be, some of your boards may be involved in reviewing, negotiating land purchases and the like. You may have information that's given to you in an executive session, for instance, or is otherwise distributed to you in a confidential fashion. You're obligated to keep that confidential information confidential. If you're required to disclose an interest in a pending matter, if you have and I think this is fairly intuitive, but if you have a direct benefit to yourself or any member of your family, that's spouse, children, direct family members, you need to ask yourself if you should be, number one, participating in the process. Number two, whether you should disclose that concern to the extent that you think you can still act. So part of this decision making around what is a conflict really kind of depends on, I think, your own view of your ability to approach the question independently. Can I, given the fact that I have some interest in this or a bias pre-existing, do I believe that I can act in a way that doesn't impact my ability to vote? If you have a direct financial interest in something, clearly you have to disclose that, and you are required to recuse yourself. We'll talk about that in a little bit more as we move along, but you're not allowed to accept gifts of substantial value. You can take flowers, those aren't substantial. But the code prohibits gifts in excess of $50 as it's currently written. So be careful about accepting gifts from people who may, could at least create the appearance that they're currying favor or trying to influence a vote. You shouldn't engage in a substantial financial transaction for your private business interests that involve something that you have oversight over or input into as a board member. You shouldn't, again, if you have a personal interest in something, as we discussed earlier, the personal interest primarily is a financial interest, but it could be such a strong personal interest that you are, your ability to, again, to remain neutral and act in a fashion that's fair to the participants, you're required to not vote on that, recuse yourself. First of all, you have to disclose that interest so that everyone's aware of it. Then you refrain from voting or recusal. And also, you should attempt to influence a vote. And the typical advice is, if you're going to recuse yourself, and this applied more so in the world where we actually have physical meetings and people attending than it is in the Zoom world, but you get up, leave the room while there's a discussion and voting on that item, because sometimes your mere presence in the room could be seen as an influence. In the Zoom world, we usually just say, turn off your Zoom, leave the Zoom until that discussion is over, and then you can be noticed to come back in the meeting. A lot of new things going on in the Zoom world there. So, and there's also limits on your ability to appear before City Council on an item which that you have an interest in. This doesn't come up very often in the boards and commission settings, but it can. So here's some basic examples. If a board member as an attorney participates in a decision in which his or her firm represents a party to the transaction, that's a direct financial benefit to you, and you shouldn't be engaged in that kind of activity. A person who arranges a paving project that directly benefits his or her property. A person fails to disclose ownership in a company involved in a matter that benefits from an official action or a contract, for instance. accepting gifts of $50 or more, other actions where the position is used to further your own personal interests. I think all of those are, hopefully fairly straightforward and intuitive. So fundamentally, you shouldn't derive a personal or private benefit from serving on a city board and commission. So again, this is the link to the ethics code, and there is an ethics pledge in the manual that you'll be asked to sign. What? Oh, hand up, sorry. Yeah, thanks.
If you recuse yourself from a vote on something, do you have to give the reason?
Well, typically you will want to disclose the fact that you have a conflict. So you would normally just announce that, so the code does require that you disclose that conflict, yes. Does that answer your question? You look like you're not.
Well, there was no financial interest. I
Okay.
recused myself from a vote, this happened a while back, and not on a city board of commission. I recused myself because the person bringing up the issue had bent my ear about it for a solid half an hour,
Okay,
and I knew that I couldn't be objective.
all right. That's a little different than a conflict situation. I mean, you may feel that you have to, that's more of an abstention, I think, and and I have a slide actually on the difference between abstentions and recusals, but, and you're on the library board, right? So we can take a moment and talk about that. There are certain boards, and Faye alluded to this earlier, that are quasi judicial in nature, that you, and those are boards like Planning Commission, Board of Ethics, those kind of boards that actually act in a judiciary sort of fashion, that you can't really be involved in accepting input from the public in those circumstances because you're acting more like a judge. And none of us want to go into court feeling like the judge has had conversations outside the setting of the hearing. So, but most other matters that are legislative, you can take all the input that you want from the public, and people are going to run to you at City Market or corner you on the street and bend your ear. There's really nothing that would prohibit you from voting in that regard, unless you feel that you really don't have the ability to make an independent judgment, and that's your call. I think that that's your call in terms of saying, hey, I don't think I can act independently, even though I don't have a personal interest in the matter. So that's again more of an abstention than it is a recusal. Other questions about? There's another hand up here. I think there's you.
Yes, there's some sort of process to go through if you feel that somebody else needs to be recused.
Yeah, they recuse themselves. Yeah, actually, yes, and I don't know if any of you have had the pleasure of listening to city council meetings, but at the beginning of all of our city council meetings, we actually the mayor actually asks a question if there are any conflicts of interest, and it causes people to hopefully think about that. I don't know, I think some boards and commissions may have adopted that. I don't know that all have, certainly not all have, but some have. If you think someone has a conflict of interest and you think it's significant enough to raise it, then there's a couple of ways to do that. You could talk to the staff person and say, hey, I think this may be an issue, and let the staff person deal with it. That's what would be the suggestion. And sometimes it may not occur to someone that they might have a conflict. That would be my suggestion in that regard. Or if you have a conflict if you think you might have a conflict of your own, you might also raise it with the staff person and say, hey, I'm not sure. Is this a problem? Is this something I should be worried about? If in doubt, you're always better off disclosing those interests, and then you've covered that in terms of making it clear that I may have some very distant issue with this, or I maybe benefited slightly from this. The general rule is that if you own a piece of property, let's say, and the Planning Commission is reviewing an application on something that might have some impact on the property in a way that's difficult to define, the code is pretty clear that as long as the impact on your interests are the same pretty much as all of the other people similarly situated, then that in and of itself doesn't create a conflict. However, if you're in a contract to sell a piece of property that comes before the Planning Commission that's going to likely close if that's approved, then that's clearly a financial benefit. So it's sometimes, it can be a gray situation. So that's a good question. How do you raise it? And I think that's the way to go about it. Other questions as we move along? Okay, we're going to move into another piece of the presentation here. These are meetings. I'm going to talk about open meetings laws. I'm going to talk about Open Records Acts a little bit, and also just sort of how to behave and how to conduct a meeting. So quorum issues, that ought to be something that, basically a quorum is a majority of the people on your board typically. There are requirements to meet open meeting posting requirements and so forth. The staff should take care of all of those kind of issues, but if you have questions, you can raise those questions. The meetings have to be posted at least 24 hours prior. The clerk's office or the staff person will take care of that and make sure that happens. That includes posting of agendas and meeting packet materials. All of that information is public record. So if you're getting something from the clerk's office or from the staff, you can be assured that that's all public information, unless it's shown as being otherwise, being confidential. It circles back to the question about recusal versus abstention. A recusal is usually a situation where you have an actual conflict or a perceived conflict, and so you're going to recuse yourself from voting altogether. An abstention, and we do operate under Robert's rules, so if you have a situation where you feel like you really don't have enough information, or you missed a number of meetings at which something was discussed and you really don't think you're in a position to vote, then an abstention can be appropriate under certain circumstances. But Robert's rules and our code of conduct generally states that it's your duty to show up, participate, and be prepared to vote on most matters, unless, again, it's an unusual circumstance where you feel like you can't act, and then you can announce that the reason for the abstention and not vote under those circumstances. Open meetings. This is very important, and this is not necessarily intuitive for all of those of you who have not served on public boards before. The city is a public entity, and it is critical that all the actions that are taken by all the appointed boards and commissions, city council, are conducted in full compliance with the open meetings law, and that means that they have to be publicly noticed, they have to be convened, they have to be open to the public, and those, any act, all discussions and all decisions have to happen within a properly noticed public meeting. I can't emphasize how important this is. And again, it's not always intuitive that you really can't communicate with each other, other board members, that is, outside of a public meeting. And I will get into a little more detail in a moment, but it's critical to keep the public trust that they are assured that decisions are not being made in a fashion where public can't see that activity going on. So if some or all members of a board have decided an outcome in private, then public participation has been undermined, has been destroyed. So it is against the law to conduct public business without proper notice. So sort of do's and don'ts: don't hold a meeting if it hasn't been noticed. Don't hold a private meeting before or after the meeting. Don't end up having an inadvertent meeting where you run into folks and you then proceed to discuss city business. The rule is 3 or more, or a quorum, who gather to discuss public business is a meeting, regardless of the format. Whether you're standing on the street corner, whether you're doing it by text, whether you're doing it by email, phone, whatever, any kind of engagement between board members outside of a public meeting is in fact a meeting, and you are violating the open meetings law by doing that. If you find yourself together by accident, a social event, or just by accident, that's fine, but just avoid discussing public business. 2 of you, the rule applies to 3 or more, or a quorum. So depending on the size of your board, I think there's probably only 1 board that has 3 members, but You know, but so the rule really is two of you can discuss, you know, activities among yourselves, but you add another one and then you violate the open meetings law by doing that. So one of the things, again, that we have to be cautious about is email and electronic discussions with other board members and other commission members. So, you know, in this day and age, we think nothing of dashing off an email, or if somebody sends out an email to one board member sends out an email to all the other board members, the moment you hit reply all and reply, you may at that moment have violated the law because you are engaged in a discussion among all of you about a topic. So be very careful about that. And the general rule is refrain from replying all. Here's an important point. You can communicate with staff without worrying about violations of the open meetings law. This is a rule about discussion among board members. And that's an important distinction. So if you want to communicate something to the rest of the board in some way, communicate with the staff person. And then they can distribute that in a way that doesn't violate the open meetings law. Yeah, Roger.
Question, are there times when it's okay for a chair to canvass the board one-on-one subjects, not something that's coming up as a vote? And for example, saying, hey, what do you think are important agenda items?
Yeah, and that's a good segue to this next slide. Your psychic, Roger. There's a recent change to the law. The rule formerly was, you know, probably if you're just doing things that are scheduling, or if you're trying to get agenda items established, that sort of thing, most of us thought that that probably wasn't a problem with a violation of the law. The legislature a few years ago created some exemptions that are to non-substantive emails. So the law allows for sending and receiving emails related to scheduling. So when can we get together, that kind of thing, to share information received from persons outside of council. So if you get a letter, this as council, but it applies to you as well. If you get a letter from somebody and you want to say, I want to share this with everybody, I still think the preferred method is to send it to staff and then they distribute it. But you can distribute a letter like that to the rest of the board as long as you don't say, here's a letter I got from so-and-so, and I agree with that person, and I think here's what we ought to do. When you get into converting it from just a distribution to something that's advocacy, I think that that's what crosses the line. And the last item is to request that a matter be discussed in the future, which is setting an agenda. So if you're doing these kinds of things, so right now, under the new law, that doesn't constitute a violation of the open meetings law. Again, if in doubt, you know, communicate with staff instead of each other, but it is possible to do those kinds of communications now. Questions about that? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question regarding what I call intra-board conversations. You know, there's boards that are sharing tax dollars and such, or sharing recommendations regarding a single tax. And I'm wondering, are we restricted or prohibited from having conversations between board members of different boards?
I think particularly if you're going to start getting into numbers that, I think the safest answer to that is perhaps one-on-one, no, you know, communication with one member of the board. If you start getting involved with more than two, then, you know, there is an argument to be made that if you share a piece of city business, then even though you're separate boards, you really are going to confer with each other about those items. The preferred approach is to conduct that in an open meeting setting. You know, I mean, that's the answer, is you should always communicate, make decisions, do all those things in public, and you never have a concern about what you're doing. Yeah.
So for the 3-person rule, it's just voting members of the board. For example, it would, if we had 2 board members in a meeting with 1 person on city council, that is.
Well, that's a variation of the question that he has asked, I think, is kind of that. So I think it depends. I think if you have a meeting of 2 of you with a city council member, technically speaking, that's not a problem because you don't have more than, you know, 2. You don't have 3 on the same board. But appearances matter, you know, I think, and if people see that, you know, those kind of meetings are happening, they always wonder, well, they, you know, pre-deciding issues. So it's always preferable to just do that in public and avoid those, you know, those kind of situations altogether. But that would not be a technical violation, and probably, you know, Seth's question, that his probably wouldn't be a technical violation either, because if it's one-on-one. But if, you know, and I'll talk about serial meetings in a moment, but another thing to talk about is a serial meeting concept where I talk to you and say, hey, I think we ought to do such and such on this topic. And then I talk to another board member and I say, hey, I talked to board member A and we agreed we ought to do so-and-so. You've in effect then sort of created a voting coalition outside of a meeting, even though you've only talked technically to two people. That still is a violation because you are, you know, serially meeting. And there's a recent case you may have seen in Douglas County where this went on when they had a case of the superintendent up there where the board members were emailing each other outside of a meeting, and they got sued because the accusation was they had violated the open meetings law by having those kind of serial communications. So that's critical, and that's why, you know, you don't want to include or again, that's why I say technically there's two of you standing on a street corner talking. That's not a violation, but when you start then going and saying, hey, again, we had this conversation, you add in everyone else, then you've effectively made a decision outside of a meeting. So hopefully that helps. Okay. Other questions about that? There is some liability associated with violating the open meetings law. The public has the right to enforce through the courts. They could sue you or the city, in both. Courts can award costs and attorney's fees and significantly undermines public trust. So you need to be careful about, this is an action. If you have concerns, questions about what is allowed and what's not allowed, talk to your staff person. And ultimately, we can help sort that out. But you can talk to staff, limit your discussions out, to between you and other commission members or board members outside of a meeting. Electronic communications, I've already mentioned this, but if you're doing city business on your own personal electronic device, then those emails, texts, calls could be sought under the Open Records Act as items that would be public records, and they very well may be public records. So the fact that you are using a personal device doesn't insulate them from the Open Records Act just because they are on a personal phone. Again, by using your device to communicate outside of a meeting, the public's denied the right to participate in that. Emails and discussions on social media platforms also can be discovered or requested under the Open Records Act and the Open Meetings Law, and be careful about those as well. I say this sometimes half jokingly, but it's serious. When you send an email, it very well could be public, and assume that it will be public, and it could be, you could read about it in the newspaper someday. So be careful about how you conduct business through electronic means. Executive sessions, I'm going to talk about this quickly. Some boards do engage in executive sessions. Again, as I mentioned earlier, some boards are involved in purchases of property. There are limited grounds that we could use for executive sessions. Your staff person will certainly provide backup and the appropriate documentation for executive sessions. No decisions can be made in executive session, but some of you on certain kinds of boards might find yourself in executive session situations. This is an important issue. Governmental Immunity Act. The Governmental Immunity Act applies to elected and appointed officials. In a nutshell, the Governmental Immunity Act says that if you are acting within the scope of your authority and you're not willfully and wantonly violating someone's rights, then you're going to be protected from liability under that provisions of the Governmental Immunity Act. Very difficult for the public in general to sue the city or you as board members as long as you're acting within the scope of your authority. The city has insurance through a risk-sharing agency. That insurance is provided to you as long as if you get, for some reason, if somebody makes a claim against you for some reason, But that only applies in situations where you're acting within your scope of authority and you're not acting willfully and wantonly. And if you do that, that could result in the loss of governmental immunity, an important concept. So let's talk a minute about what is the scope and what is, how are your actions governed under the concept of what is your authority? First of all, I think the most important thing to remember is that you as a board member, and this is true of city councilors or any other appointed or elected officials, is that you have absolutely zero authority outside of a properly convened public meeting. You're not, the only entity that's allowed to set policy for the city is the city council. You may be advisory, to council, but the boards and commissions that you sit on do not have the authority to create policy. And you certainly don't, as individuals, have the authority to create or represent what the policy is until that is indeed adopted by city council. So, it's important to understand that, sort of getting back to what Faye mentioned at the beginning, is that, it's important that you honor your role in the process. And council has appointed all of you to these boards and commissions for a variety of reasons, and they're seeking your input, but they want it done in a fashion that means that you've gone through the process. If you're on a board that believes that city council ought to be aware of an issue and ought to take a position on a particular issue, then there's a process to do that. You bring it up in a board meeting, you seek public input, you deliberate that in public, and you make decisions. And that's the process that's used to set policy or set advice or to take quasi-judicial actions. But those items, again, as far as policy setting, go to council. So, I think it's important to recognize that and to be aware that you have to act as a body. There's really no authority on anyone to either proclaim or represent what a city policy is as an individual board member. So be careful about how you do that, and appearances are important. Faye mentioned T-shirts and slogans and maybe signage in Zoom that could be taken as a statement of what city, because you're doing this in a public meeting, you're doing it in a way that's using city resources, city staff, city support. So be cognizant of the fact that that could be taken to be a representation of city policy when that hasn't actually been taken, the proper actions haven't been taken to get to that point. So ask you to be cognizant of that and to honor the roles that you play as individuals and as the roles that you play as a board acting in again, in an organized fashion through proper channels, properly noticed meetings, votes, public input. That is, and then reporting to council in terms of how you do that. That's a cumbersome process, I understand. But that's how government functions. It's set up to function in the public eye and to make sure that the decision making of the whole board is taken into account. So I'll pause there a second and see if there's any questions about that.
Can you ask one question?
Yeah.
So when I read, God forbid, some of the law about open meetings law, it seemed to apply by law to decision-making quasi-judicial boards, and advisory boards were exempt from that. I think the city has decided that it will apply to all boards for the city.
That's true. And I think to the extent that there's any confusion about that, I don't think there's any difference in the application of the open meetings law, whether the board's advisory or whether it's quasi-judicial. And our boards and commissions manual and city council has been clear that the open meetings law applies to all boards and commissions, regardless of what you're doing. No, I think the open meetings law applies to advisory boards just like it does to quasi-judicial boards. Yeah.
You know, I have no trouble respecting that. I'm curious, however, you can answer yes or no. Is there precedent that an advisory board member or advisory board has gotten the city sued by the public?
Not sued, no.
Just in hot water?
Well, yeah, I mean, the last thing that I want to do is answer a phone call from a citizen who says, hey, I think XYZ board, violated the open meetings law. So, or get a letter, to that effect. So I can't say that that's never happened, phone calls and letters, but we've never been sued over that particular accusation. But it does damage the whole process, even the perception that there's been a violation. So that's why it's important and it's critical. And council, you have to, honor that to the greatest extent possible. There are times when there's inadvertent, you may just forget and send an email. I mean, we're not looking. It's really it's more of a pattern. It's more of a situation where decision making is occurring in a way that deprives the public of that input. So, I'd be careful about that. Hopefully that's clear. So, yeah. Okay. Anything else on that? Thank you. Questions? Quickly, legislative versus quasi-judicial. I think we've already talked about this a little bit. The quasi-judicial boards are Board of Ethics. I wish I had a slide back up there. Planning Commission, certain other planning boards are quasi-judicial in the sense that they are hearing evidence and making judge-like decisions on particular land use applications, for instance, zoning issues, those kinds of things. They're going to be deciding those in a way that limits them to take evidence at the hearings that are conducted on those questions. They should not take evidence or listen to people on the street, for that matter, about that topic. In a small town, it's difficult to avoid that. It's difficult to explain to people. For those of you who may be on the planning commission, that I can't talk to you about that. People don't understand that, but it's important that you inform them that I have to take the evidence at the hearing and then make decisions based on that, again, just like a judge would. A legislative process is one that's really about setting policy and assisting council in setting policy. Then you're not limited in that fashion. It's a legislative process. You can take input from whoever whoever approaches you. You will get letters from people. You will get emails from people. You will get phone calls from people. That's not really a problem as long as you understand that all the board members should be hearing the same things you're hearing. So again, if you get emails directly from a constituent about something, the best approach is forward that on to staff, and then they can make sure that all the board members are hearing the same thing that you're hearing. And that happens sometimes. If you have questions about this, important for those of you who are on quasi-judicial boards to understand the limitations on what you can do in terms of taking evidence. I think we've already probably covered that topic. Avoid ex parte contacts. Ex parte contacts is what I just described. Someone coming up to you in City Market and saying, hey, I know you guys are going to be acting on such and such application next week. I think that's a horrible idea, and here's why. You have to just kindly say, sorry, I can't talk to you about that. And we're going to listen to the evidence at the hearing. So that's, I think I ran a little long, so questions? Okay, thank you. If you do have questions about any of this, again, talk to your staff person, and then if need be, we can try to answer questions. So, thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Dirk. So I'm Devin Schmidt. I'm the Budget and Strategic Plan Officer for the City of Durango. And so I wanted to show you all some resources as it relates to the City of Durango strategic plan and the budget, so that you are able to utilize those for your particular functions in each one of your boards. So the strategic plan purpose. So the 2022 strategic plan outlines the short and midterm objectives. It influences the city budget process. It guides and implements the city's full range of services to set priorities aligned with organizational strategy The strategic plan also motivates energy and resources and well-being. It strengthens operations. It ensures the team is working on a common goal. So the strategic plan process started in 2021. The first plan was adopted thereafter. It starts with City Council meeting with staff to go over their goals and objectives for the city. In 2022, we refreshed that plan early in the year, and the outcome of that resulted in 7 different goal areas. The 7 goal areas are listed here. You can see kind of which focuses that the council has at the very highest level. Another addition to the 2022 strategic plan was the performance metrics. So what the performance metrics will do for citizens and boards and council is really provide the opportunity to show how the city is achieving those strategic objectives. So in 2022, we did adopt 2 plans. They are the same plan. The first one that you're seeing there with the blue background, that is the strategic plan. What we also did was the 2022 strategic operating plan. What the operating plan has in there is actions that will support the goals of council in fulfilling the strategic plan goals. So the one to the left there is a bit broader in focus, and that's intentional to reflect the higher policy decision level goals of council. The strategic operating plan is what staff will be working on to carry out the goals of council. So those are 2 resources for your use as you're working on any of your boards and commissions items. If you want to see what the areas that council adopted as their goals. So breaking it down a little bit in that strategic operating plan, we have the 7 goal areas, and so this breaks it down by a service. So for diversity, equity, and inclusion, all of the city is responsible, city staff, for carrying out this particular goal. If you look at financial excellence and high-performing government, that includes the services offered by the city manager's office, the budget and strategic plan office, city attorney, human resources, risk management, financial services, accounting and customer service, and information technology. Under affordability and economic opportunity, this area is really focused with services that exist in community development, public works and engineering. For enhanced livability and sense of place, that area focuses parks and recreation, police, 911 communication, library, municipal court, and community development as well. And then finally, we have the effective infrastructure network, which has multimodal transportation, public works, water, wastewater, streets, and engineering, as well as the CIP division. Airport, financial services, and that includes the 2 services that are offered by fleet and general services. Environmental sustainability and resilience, so that is community development with our sustainability programs. Public works, trash and recycle, and an engaged collaborative governments, that is our city clerks function, media and community engagement, and then public works and engineering. So within the plan, you will see that each one of these service areas has been broken down, so you can look for if there's an area where your particular board operates primarily, you're able to look at the plan and see kind of what those items are. So I talked a little bit about the process. The budget and the strategic plan process are one that are married, so they have synergies that connect to each other. The process for the budget and strategic plan kicks off in February with that planning process, and that goes through July. There's a bit of overlap between that planning process and where the budget actually kicks over to the departmental budgets, which is May through August. September and October, that's really the city manager's budget, and that's his time to go through it before it's presented to council. October, November is the city council's budget. So once staff has gone through it, and the city manager council has their opportunity to go through, make changes. And then finally in December is when we adopt the budget. So that's kind of the budget process for the city. little bit more granular calendar and how this pertains to some of the advisory boards. So some of the advisory boards do provide recommendation around the capital projects. So in the budget calendar, we have built in that by July 22nd, we should have the CIP deadline. So that's when the staff liaison should have brought in you the projects for budget consideration. We kicked off budget last Friday, and so staff will start working on their departmental budgets, those CIP projects, and so that's kind of that process. After they've been brought into the advisory boards, there's 2 study sessions where council will take a first look at some of those capital projects. The first one is August 2nd, and the second is August 16th. And so that is the time where council takes the recommendation of those CIP projects, reviews them, and has that consideration and the opportunity to talk about them at the study session environment. And then finally, if you're not familiar, we implemented OpenGov last year, and what OpenGov is, it's our transparency portal. So any citizen, any member of your board can come and look at the budget as it was adopted. You also have the opportunity to come in and see the transactions as they come in daily. So I was going to just open this up here and hopefully it'll pop up and just give you a brief walkthrough about how you can utilize this tool. You can find the transparency portal by going to the City of Durango website, the city manager's office, and then you can click on that link to utilize the transparency portal. So within here,